A single drop of cyanide in aged scotch looks exactly like water. In the dim light of Manhattan's most exclusive underground dining room, that invisible poison was meant to topple an empire. Instead, a struggling waitress made a silent switch, rewriting the fate of the city's most dangerous man. The Velvet Oak was not a restaurant you simply walked into. Tucked beneath the bustling pavement of Tribeca, it was a fortress of mahogany, low lighting, and whispered secrets. It was a place where millions of dollars were laundered over plates of white truffle risotto, and where the true rulers of New York City carved up their territories. For Clara Jennings, however, it was just the place that paid her enough in tips to keep her younger brother's leukemia treatments at Mount Sinai Hospital funded. Clara was 24, chronically exhausted, and fiercely observant. You had to be observant to survive the VIP section of the Velvet Oak. She knew which politicians tipped well, which hedge fund managers had wandering hands, and which men carried firearms beneath their tailored Brioni jackets. Tonight, the tension in the private dining alcove was thick enough to choke on. Dominic Rossi sat at the head of the table. He was a man whose reputation preceded him. A phantom in the tabloids, but a god in the underworld. Dominic had inherited his father's syndicate at 28 and ruthlessly modernized it. I was strikingly handsome, with sharp, aristocratic features and eyes like shattered flint. He didn't speak loudly. He never had to. Opposite him sat Declan Gallagher, the reigning boss of the West Side docks. Gallagher was old, red-faced, and possessed a booming laugh that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. The sit-down was supposedly a peace treaty, a division of shipping routes that had been contested in blood for 6 months. Standing by the service bar, Clara waited for the bartender to finish pouring 3 neat glasses of Macallan. Her feet ached, but her mind was razor-sharp. As the bartender turned his back to grab a linen napkin, Clara saw it. One of Gallagher's bodyguards, a towering man with a cauliflower ear, casually leaned against the service station. With a flick of his wrist, a tiny, innocuous glass vial appeared between his fingers. In one fluid, practiced motion, he emptied a single, clear drop into the glass on the far left of Clara's silver tray. The liquid dissolved instantly. The bodyguard caught Clara's eye for a fraction of a second, his gaze flat, carrying a silent, lethal warning. "Speak, and you die." Clara's heart slammed against her ribs. The breath evaporated from her lungs. She knew the seating arrangement. The glass on the far left was Dominic Rossi's. She picked up the heavy silver tray. Her hands trembled, but she forced her wrists to lock, balancing the crystal tumblers. The walk from the service bar to the private alcove felt like a march to the gallows. If I say something, there will be a shootout right here, Clara thought, panic rising in her throat. If I don't, Dominic Rossi dies, and Gallagher takes over. And Gallagher's man knows I saw him. She approached the table. Dominic and Declan were locked in a low, intense conversation about port tariffs. "Gentlemen," Clara murmured, her voice steady despite the hurricane of terror inside her. She lowered the tray. As she did, she made a choice. It wasn't born of loyalty to Dominic. She didn't know the man, but of a primal, desperate instinct for survival. Gallagher's men would never leave a witness alive. If Rossi died, she was next. With a sleight of hand, born of years carrying overflowing trays through crowded rooms, Clara didn't just serve the drinks. She smoothly rotated the tray a fraction of an inch as she leaned in. She set the clean glass on the right down in front of Gallagher's underboss. Then, with her left hand, she placed the tainted glass the one meant for Dominic, directly in front of Declan Gallagher. Finally, she placed the remaining clean glass in front of Dominic Rossi. It was a flawless execution. Almost. Dominic Rossi did not survive in his world by being oblivious. He possessed a hyper-vigilance that bordered on the supernatural. As Clara stepped back, she made the mistake of glancing up. Dominic was not looking at his glass. He was looking directly at her. His dark eyes were narrowed, entirely focused on her face. He had seen the slight hesitation, the unnatural rotation of the tray, the way her knuckles were white. He had watched her deliberately swap the order of the drinks. Clara froze, her breath catching. He knew she had done something. "To new beginnings, Dominic," Gallagher boomed, picking up his crystal tumbler. He didn't notice the switch. He was too arrogant, too certain of his impending victory. May our mutual interests prosper. Dominic did not break eye contact with Clara. He slowly reached for his own glass. "To the truth, Declan," Dominic replied softly. "It always rises to the surface." Gallagher threw his head back and downed the scotch in one large swallow. Clara stepped backward, pressing herself against the silk-lined wall, her hands gripping her empty tray like a shield. Dominic took a slow, deliberate sip of his clean scotch, his eyes still burning into Clara's. 3 seconds passed. 5. Then Gallagher's heavy crystal tumbler shattered against the mahogany table. The Irish boss choked, his face instantly draining of color before flushing a violent, mottled purple. He clawed at his own throat, his eyes bulging as he desperately gasped for air that his lungs suddenly refused to process. The chair screeched against the hardwood floor as Gallagher convulsed, tumbling backward in a heap of flailing limbs and agonizing gasps. Chaos erupted in a fraction of a second, Gallagher's underboss shouted, reaching into his jacket. But Dominic's men were ghosts who had been waiting for a reason to haunt. Before Gallagher's man could clear his holster, 2 suppressed shots coughed quietly in the room. The underboss slumped over the table, bleeding onto the white truffle risotto. The bodyguard who had poisoned the drink lunged forward, but Dominic was already moving. With terrifying speed, the Mafia boss drew a sleek Kimber 1911 from his waistband and fired once. The bodyguard collapsed against the service bar, dead before he hit the floor. The dining room was suddenly completely silent, save for the horrifying, wet gurgling coming from Declan Gallagher as the cyanide finished its brutal work. Clara stood frozen against the wall, her silver tray clattering to the ground. She couldn't breathe. She had just murdered a man. She had just killed a Mafia boss. Dominic Rossi stood tall amidst the carnage, his bespoke suit immaculate. He holstered his weapon and turned his terrifying gaze back to the terrified waitress pressed against the wallpaper. "Gabriel," Dominic said, his voice terrifyingly calm, addressing his lead enforcer, who was already securing the doors. "Get the cars. We have 3 minutes before the NYPD gets a tip-off." "Boss, what about the mess?" Gabriel asked, eyeing the bodies. "Leave it. The message has been sent," Dominic replied. Then he took 3 long strides toward Clara. She shrank back, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. I just..." Dominic reached out, his large, warm hand wrapping securely around her trembling bicep. It wasn't a violent grip, but it was an unbreakable one. "You're coming with me." "No!" Clara gasped, trying to pull away. "I have to go home. I have to..." "If you stay here, you are a dead woman," Dominic stated coldly, pulling her toward the kitchen doors. Gallagher's people will review the security tapes. They will see the bodyguard poison the drink, and they will see you switch it. You are the reason their boss is dead. You belong to me now." The word sent a chill straight to her marrow. "You belong to me now." Dominic dragged her through the panicked kitchen staff, out the heavy steel service doors, and into the frigid night air of the alleyway. 3 black, armored SUVs were waiting, their engines purring menacingly. Gabriel opened the rear door of the center vehicle, and Dominic practically shoved Clara inside before climbing in next to her. "Drive, the Alpine Estate," Dominic commanded. The convoy sped off, merging onto the FDR drive with aggressive precision. Inside the dark, leather-scented cabin, the silence was suffocating. Clara huddled against the far door, hugging her knees to her chest, her breathing shallow and frantic. She was in a car with the head of the Rossi crime family, covered in the metaphorical blood of his rival. Dominic poured a glass of water from a small console and held it out to her. She stared at it, horrified. A ghost of a smirk played on Dominic's lips. "It's not poisoned, Clara. I pour my own water." She flinched. "How do you know my name?" "I own the Velvet Oak," Dominic said softly, leaning back against the leather seat. "I know the name of every employee. I know you work double shifts. I know you send $3,000 a month to Mount Sinai for your brother, Tommy. What I didn't know until 10 minutes ago was that you had the nerve to intervene in a mob war." Clara took the water with shaking hands, taking a tiny sip. "The man by the bar, he slipped something into your glass. He looked at me. He was going to kill me anyway to cover his tracks." "So you gave the poison to Declan," Dominic stated, analyzing her. He wasn't angry. He was fascinated. "You didn't scream. You didn't drop the tray. You didn't alert my men. You made a tactical decision, executed it flawlessly under pressure, and watched a man die without blinking." "I closed my eyes," Clara argued, her voice cracking with raw emotion. "I didn't want to kill him. I didn't want to die. And I didn't want you to die." Dominic's expression softened, just a fraction. He shifted closer to her, the sheer physical presence of him overwhelming in the confined space of the SUV. He reached out, his knuckles gently grazing her pale cheek, wiping away a stray tear. The touch sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. "You saved my life, Clara Jennings," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a gravelly, intimate register. "In my world, a debt of blood is absolute. I owe you my life." "I don't want your life," Clara whispered, looking up into his dangerous, hypnotic eyes. "I just want to go back to mine." Dominic withdrew his hand, his mask of cold authority slipping back into place. "That life is gone. As of tonight, there is a multi-million-dollar bounty on your head. The Irish will not rest until you are in the ground." He looked out the tinted window as the city skyline faded into the darkness of the New Jersey highway. "But they will have to go through me to get to you, and nobody goes through me." The SUV turned off the main road, winding through dense, heavily wooded roads until massive wrought-iron gates loomed in the headlights. The gates swung open, revealing a sprawling, fortress-like stone mansion bathed in security lights. Armed men patrolled the perimeter with assault rifles. Clara realized with a sinking, terrifying clarity that she hadn't just escaped death. She had traded one nightmare for another. She was now the prized possession, the savior, and the ultimate liability of the most dangerous man on the eastern seaboard. And as Dominic Rossi looked at her in the dim light of the cabin, she saw something far more dangerous than gratitude in his eyes. She saw possession. The Rossi estate in Alpine, New Jersey, was a masterpiece of cold, imposing architecture. For the first 2 weeks, Clara felt less like a guest and more like a rare bird locked inside a gilded cage. Her suite was larger than her entire apartment in Queens, outfitted with silk sheets, a marble soaking tub, and a balcony that overlooked acres of dense, heavily patrolled pine forest. But the heavy oak door was always flanked by 2 armed men in immaculate suits. Clara paced the Persian rug of her room, anxiety gnawing at her stomach. Her thoughts were consumed entirely by one person. The heavy door unlatched, snapping her attention away from the window. Dominic Rossi stepped into the room. He had discarded his suit jacket, his crisp white shirt rolled up at the sleeves, revealing a complex sleeve of dark ink winding down his left forearm. He looked exhausted, the shadows under his flinty eyes deeper than usual, but his presence still commanded the very oxygen in the room. "Where is my brother?" Clara demanded immediately, not retreating a single step as he approached. "You took my phone. I missed my visit at the hospital. If Tommy thinks I abandoned him—" "Tommy is no longer in New York," Dominic interrupted, his voice a low, soothing baritone designed to de-escalate. Panic flared in Clara's chest. She lunged forward, grabbing the fabric of his shirt. "What did you do to him? If you hurt him—" Dominic didn't flinch. He simply looked down at her hands, gripping his shirt, then met her furious gaze. "I moved him. Do you think Conor Gallagher, Declan's son, is mourning quietly? The Irish mob put a $2 million bounty on the Waitress who poisoned their king. Mount Sinai was compromised. The moment they identified you from the restaurant's security footage, they sent men to the pediatric ward." Clara's blood ran ice cold. Her grip on his shirt loosened. "They went after a 10-year-old boy. They are animals," Dominic stated coldly, though his hands gently came up to grasp her wrists, steadying her. "But my men got there first. Tommy was safely transferred via private medevac to the Wellington Medical Institute in Switzerland. He is under the care of the top pediatric oncologists in Europe, registered under a pseudonym. I have secured an entire private wing for him. He is safe, Clara. Safer than he has ever been." Tears blurred Clara's vision, a complex wave of overwhelming relief and terrifying realization crashing over her. She collapsed against Dominic's chest, the fight entirely draining out of her. To her surprise, the ruthless syndicate boss didn't push her away. Instead, his arms wrapped around her, pulling her flush against his solid frame. One hand rested on the small of her back. The other gently stroked her hair. "I told you," Dominic murmured against her temple. "You saved my life. I protect what is mine." What is mine? The words vibrated through her. She was deeply entangled with a monster, yet he was the only one keeping the wolves at bay. Over the next month, the dynamics within the sprawling estate shifted. Clara refused to remain a helpless captive confined to her suite. She demanded access to the library, the kitchens, and the sprawling gardens. Dominic, amused by her fiery defiance, granted her increasing liberties, provided Gabriel or another trusted guard was always within shouting distance. They began sharing meals. In the cavernous formal dining room, sitting at opposite ends of a 20-foot mahogany table, felt absurd to Clara. On the third night, she picked up her plate of roasted duck and simply walked to his end, sitting in the chair immediately to his right. Dominic had paused, his fork mid-air. a rare, genuine smile touching the corner of his lips. Through quiet, late-night conversations over untouched glasses of whiskey, Clara saw the man beneath the myth. Dominic had never wanted the throne. He had been a brilliant student, accepted into a prestigious law program before his older brother was gunned down, forcing Dominic to abandon his future to stabilize the bleeding family empire. He was ruthless because survival demanded it, not because he enjoyed the cruelty. "You look at me and see a criminal," Dominic said one evening in the library, the firelight dancing across his sharp jawline. "I see a man carrying a world he hates," Clara replied softly, closing the book on her lap. The air between them crackled. Dominic stood, crossing the space between them with slow, deliberate steps. He pulled her up from the leather armchair, his gaze dropping to her lips. "You see too much, Clara," he whispered, right before he kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate, hungry, and fueled by weeks of unspoken tension. Clara responded with equal fervor, her hands tangling in his dark hair, pulling him closer. In a world of death and betrayal, they found an anchor in each other. But the outside world was not content to let them be. The intelligence reports Dominic received grew increasingly grim. Conor Gallagher was systematically dismantling the fragile peace treaties across the 5 boroughs. He was young, erratic, and blindingly thirsty for vengeance. More concerning, Dominic's shipments at the docks were being intercepted with suspicious accuracy. "We have a leak," Gabriel reported one afternoon, standing in Dominic's soundproof study. Clara sat silently in the corner, a position Dominic now openly allowed her to keep. "Conor knows our routes. He knows our patrol schedules. Someone on the inside is feeding the Irish our playbook." Dominic's expression was carved from granite. "Find the rat, and when you do, bring him to me alive." Clara felt a cold dread pooling in her stomach. The fortress was impenetrable from the outside, but if the rot was on the inside, nowhere was safe. Her suspicions zeroed in on a mid-level captain named Leo. He was charismatic, always flashing a brilliant smile. But Clara's years of observing the elite at the Velvet Oak had trained her to spot nervous tells. Leo constantly checked his burner phone when he thought no one was looking, and his eyes darted to the perimeter cameras whenever he visited the estate. She voiced her concerns to Dominic late one night. Dominic frowned, tracing circles on her bare shoulder in the darkness of his bedroom. "Leo has been in with my family for 15 years. He practically raised Gabriel. It's a heavy accusation, Clara." "I know," she whispered. "But the men who smile the widest are usually the ones hiding the sharpest knives. Just watch him." Dominic kissed her forehead. "I will." He should have acted faster. The storm hit on a Tuesday night. It was a torrential downpour, the kind that turned the sky pitch black and masked the sound of anything moving through the dense alpine woods. Clara woke with a start. The digital clock on the nightstand read 2:14 a.m. The sprawling mansion was dead silent, but a strange metallic scent hung in the air, the smell of ozone from a shorted circuit. She rolled over. Dominic's side of the bed was empty, the sheets cold. A sudden, muffled thump echoed from the hallway, followed by a heavy drag. Adrenaline spiked in Clara's veins. She slipped out of bed, grabbing the heavy brass candlestick from the mantel. She crept to the bedroom door and cracked it open. The hallway, usually brightly lit and occupied by 2 guards, was pitch black. A body lay slumped against the far wall. The security grid had been compromised. Dominic? Clara breathed into the darkness. No answer. She remembered Dominic's emergency protocols. If the house falls, get to the armory panic room. She slipped into the hallway, her bare feet silent on the hardwood. As she rounded the corner toward the grand staircase, a flash of lightning illuminated the foyer below. Clara clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. A dozen men in black tactical gear were pouring through the splintered front doors. They were moving with silent, deadly precision, spreading out to clear the ground floor rooms. Leading them was a man with striking red hair, Connor Gallagher. And standing next to Connor, pointing toward the west wing, where the master suite was located, was Leo. Clara's blood boiled. She had been right, but being right was about to get them all killed. Where was Dominic? Where was Gabriel? A sudden eruption of gunfire shattered the silence. The deafening roar of automatic weapons came from the east wing, Dominic's study. He's trapped, Clara realized. The tactical team below immediately pivoted, rushing toward the sound of the firefight. Clara could have run. She knew the layout of the hidden servant corridors. She could have slipped out to the garage and escaped into the woods. But the thought of Dominic dying alone in his study anchored her feet to the floor. She was no longer just a waitress surviving the night. She was the woman who loved the king, and she refused to let his empire fall to a rat. She bolted down the secondary staff stairwell, bypassing the main ambush. The gunfire grew deafening as she approached the rear entrance to the study. Peering around the doorframe, she saw the situation was dire. Dominic and Gabriel were pinned down behind a massive mahogany desk. They had taken down 4 of the Irish mobsters, but Connor and Leo were laying down heavy suppressing fire from the hallway, chewing the antique furniture into splinters. Dominic's shoulder was bleeding profusely, his pristine white shirt stained crimson. They were running out of ammunition, and they were entirely trapped. Clara needed a distraction. She scanned the adjacent butler's pantry and spotted the estate's massive industrial fuse box. Leo had bypassed the main grid to kill the lights, but the emergency floodlights and the alarm klaxons were wired separately, requiring a manual override that the traitors hadn't found. With shaking hands, Clara grabbed a heavy wrench from a tool drawer. She smashed the glass casing of the emergency override box and yanked the heavy red lever downward. The effect was instantaneous and blinding. Every high-intensity security floodlight inside the mansion flared to life at maximum wattage, washing the dark halls in blinding, glaring white light. Simultaneously, an 120-decibel siren shrieked through the corridors. Connor and his men, whose eyes had adjusted to the darkness, screamed in pain, dropping their weapons to clutch their blinded eyes and ringing ears. Dominic didn't hesitate. Trained to operate in chaos, he surged up from behind the ruined desk. With terrifying, calculated precision, he fired 3 shots. 2 of the tactical mercenaries dropped instantly. The 3rd shot caught Leo directly in the chest, throwing the traitor backward into the hallway wall. Gabriel moved just as fast, clearing the doorway and disarming a stumbling Connor Gallagher, kicking the back of the young boss's knees to force him to the floor. Within 60 seconds, the firefight was over. Dominic, clutching his bleeding shoulder, swept his eyes around the room. Through the smoke and the blinding lights, he saw Clara standing by the pantry door, dropping the heavy wrench. He crossed the room, pulling her into a tight, fierce embrace, burying his face in her hair. "You stubborn, magnificent woman," he rasped, his heart hammering against hers. "I told you to run if the house fell." "The house didn't fall," Clara whispered fiercely, gripping his waist. And I'm tired of running. Dominic pulled back, looking into her eyes. He saw the steel there, the same steel that had allowed her to silently switch a poisoned glass a month ago. He smiled, a dark, proud smile. He turned toward the hallway. Connor Gallagher was kneeling on the floor, restrained by Gabriel, his face pale with terror. Dominic walked slowly toward the young Irish boss. Your father was greedy, Connor. But you? You were just stupid. You brought a war to my home. You bought my men. Dominic gestured to Leo's lifeless body. Go to hell, Rossi, Connor spat, though his voice trembled. I own hell, Dominic replied softly. He raised his weapon and fired a single shot. The empire of the West Side docks fell in an instant. Hours later, the storm had passed. The bodies were cleared. The corrupt elements of the Rossi family were violently purged, and the estate was locked down by heavily armed loyalists. Clara sat on the edge of the master bed, carefully bandaging Dominic's shoulder. The room was quiet, save for the crackling of the fireplace. Connor's death will leave a massive vacuum, Dominic said quietly, watching her hands work. The families will try to claim the docks. The war isn't over. It's just evolving. You'll handle it, Clara said smoothly, tying off the bandage. Dominic caught her hand, holding it against his chest. I can arrange a new life for you. A flight to Switzerland. A new identity. Enough money that you and Tommy will never want for anything. You don't have to live in this darkness, Clara. Clara looked at the man who had kidnapped her, protected her, and ultimately laid his heart bare before her. She had entered this world by accident, forced to make a silent switch to save her own life. But staying, that would be a choice. She leaned forward, pressing a soft kiss to his lips, tasting the lingering smoke and the promise of absolute power. I switched the glass, Dominic, Clara whispered, her eyes flashing with a dangerous, newly minted authority. I saved the king. That makes me the queen. And the queen doesn't run. Dominic Rossi's eyes darkened with fierce pride and consuming possession. He pulled her down onto the bed, sealing their fate together. The waitress was dead. The matriarch of the Rossi syndicate had just been born. Did you love this thrilling Mafia romance? The silent switch, the betrayal, and Clara's rise to become the ultimate mob queen. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. Share it with your friends who love a dark and twisting romance. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible, heart-pounding stories like this every week. Drop a comment below with your favorite scene.